Good morning, friends. What I plan to do is go through one of my slide decks. I'll have a link to the slide deck, and what I encourage is that more people make slide decks similar to this one. They don't have to be called graph theory. The idea is you pick some major figures or minor figures. It's not a matter of how well known these people are in history so much as what can you in your curriculum do like a network that connects the dots. So, like in this, my first slide, I'm connecting Ada Byron in the middle to her mentor, one of them, someone she collaborated with, um, Charles Babbage. And you look up his resume and his role, and then you read her bio, and you realize that together or alone, each one is somewhat of a key that opens up just enormous amounts of personalities and technological developments and what was going on in England in particular in the early to mid 1800s. So I'm picking someone who lived in like 1800 to 1850. And then her dad, Ada's dad on the right, Lord Byron. Now gets the reputation, I think, deservedly. I've written a defense of her. You can find my defense of Ada. In defense of Ada, I think I called it, where someone was in the New Yorker, wasn't it, trying to take away her crown as the first computer programmer. And I fight back. Now, there's a link to Bernoulli numbers there, I think. So if you're a Python student, you're trying to learn to code yourself, look at series of numbers and sequences. I mean, same thing, except series add them up. And like the Bernoulli sequence, or we'll get to these other sequences in synergetics. So that's the opening slide, and then I pick some obscure, like lesser known people, because I'd say, given Ada's widespread reputation as the first computer programmer and Charles Babbage, and I'd say those are well known personages, but here not so much. We have the Queen of Romania on the left, Queen Marie, and is it no, just Queen Marie of Romania. She's in the family tree of Queen Victoria. She's kind of coming from the British royal house and marrying a king in Romania, and then he's pretty frail at some point, and she takes off for an adventure to North America to ride ride the trains with her entourage, go across country all the way to Washington State, where she already knows from his visits, I believe, to Europe, Sam Hill in the middle here. And then Loie Fuller, who's not connected to Buckminster Fuller, who's coming up. She's a dancer. She's very vivacious. You can kind of tell from the picture. And she also knows Sam, because Sam's kind of a socialite in French and European higher level circles. Like he's an admired self made man from America, Sam Hill. And Sam Hill, he builds a whole museum. It's a palace, but it's always been meant as to outlive him, of course, and be how European culture gets to Washington State, really, in the form of this display of many wonderful things from Europe that are brought to him by the Queen of Romania and Loie Fuller, who are riding in her entourage. Loie's in her entourage. And they come all the way. It was talking like 1920s here, so. And Sam Hill builds this palace called Maryhill on the north bank of the Columbia Gorge, and the entourage leaves all this European art and stuff. They brought it to help sort of seed the far west with high culture. Now, I've picked another female of great intellect in the lower left. That's Margaret Fuller. And she is a contemporary of Ada Byron. I've got her picture repeated below her dad's on the far right. And then we have a diminutive Immanuel Kant in the lower middle, and he's feeding philosophy and just being generally influential. He's like the European high culture philosophy. Coming through Hegel or not, you've got Kant there as this towering figure. And he's coming up through Coleridge at the middle, top middle, who in turn is influencing the whole of the Transcendentalism movement, which is arising out of Unitarianism in the Harvard Harvard Cambridge area, right? And that's where both Emerson on the left and Margaret are conversationalists. Margaret especially has founded a conversationalist chapter, and she is just so well read. Given her education and her sharpness, she's like right on top of things. She becomes an international reporter for the New York Herald Tribune. She's sent overseas to report on revolutionary fighting going on in Italy and Rome. So you've got, and she also travels to the West, pretty far west for those days for a woman of her demographic, right? She gets out to the Great Lakes and stuff. So there's a whole literature, of course, around the Transcendentalists. So I'm here suggesting like the philosophical sweep coming through Hegel. We're getting into a transcendentalist out of Unitarian that picks up sort of German idealism minus what's to run in parallel, pretty much, which is Marxism. Marxism is going to be like a contemporary in a way in as these generations advance, but this establishes what you might call like Thoreau's protest, living on Walden Pond, refusing to pay taxes. Why was he put in jail for a night? What was that about? The tension arising here is imperialism and expansionism being like a dominating conqueror. Is that going to help the country evolve or mature? And the transcendentalists tend to be cast as not into this whole manifest destiny, let's conquer the world thing. More, let's take advantage of democracy and our new sort of potential for utopia and let's create some kind of heaven on earth in terms of communities, right? The transcendentalists started a lot of communities. Now, Nietzsche, he comes along, as you know, he dies. He's not a contemporary of the German socialists and World War II and all that. I mean, sometimes I get the feeling people think Nietzsche was good buddies with Adolph, but not so. He died about around the same few days or months that Adolf was born. It's Wittgenstein and Adolf that have an interesting overlap, I think. So there's Emerson and Margaret again. So Nietzsche is the far left guy here. I'm updating philosophy. So we're telling this story and we're using this graph theory to like link into key personages and then taking the side trips, right? Going down the rabbit holes, which I have not really been doing, but I'm suggesting doing that. And I'm suggesting anyone can create these kind of talking or not talking heads, these graphs, as I call them, of people, and put yourself in it, right? So that we get to know you as the teacher. Don't need to be super objective. And now, if you have no relation to the people you're discussing, it's a graph of people who are all strangers to you. That's fine too. And maybe it's not a slideshow you created, and you don't have to put yourself in. But I'm saying here's an opportunity to do what I call place-based education. And so this is a young Sam Lanahan, relatively next to this Bucky Fuller character. And we've got my youthful yearbook picture from the Philippines in the same frame because there's connections here. Like I do actually have a long-term friendship with Sam, but it starts much later than in this picture. He's showing Bucky his curved tensegrities here. He's got compression members that are not just straight rods, and he's branching off into what would later later become Flextegrity. And he's the grandson of Fitzgerald's up there, upper right. So this gets us into kind of the whole deep state thing. Sam is also from this Washington, D.C. background, the Georgetown crowd. The Ivy Leaguers, in some case, at Applewhite on the left, and James Jesus Angleton in the middle. Both go to Yale about the same time. And then on the right, we have Ezra Pound. And there's a whole bunch to discuss here. The links, by the way, that is Yale's logo down at the bottom. And Applewhite, somebody I got to know pretty well when he was older guy. And okay, so I'm not going to tell all the stories here, except that Angleton visited Ezra when he was a young man at Yale. He ran a literary journal called Orlando, and he was always in correspondence with Ezra, who was always looking to nurture talent where he could find it. And I believe he came and spoke at Yale at least a couple times. Now, Ezra, as you know, he gets put in prison later, fast forward, because he's living in Italy and, he's seeing things from an Italian point of view and coming on the radio and basically, he's on the wrong side of history in World War II, you could say. And here he is as an old man in Spoleto, I think, there with Bucky Fuller and is one of his best friend, Noguchi, Isamu Noguchi. They have a long history of renting this apartments together and all this. Met in Greenwich Village, thanks to Romany Marie, the Queen of Greenwich Village. And there's Applewhite again on the right side, who was kind of a collaborator with Bucky Fuller on synergetics, which is one of the puzzle pieces that fits into this graph and helps you understand, say, why Hugh Kenner is here, because he was a big fan of Bucky Fuller as well and wrote Geodesic Math and How to Use It and a bio of Bucky called Bucky being a nickname for Buckminster Fuller, who we saw in a previous slide and we'll see again in a minute or two. Ezra again on the right, and James Joyce on the left. This is what we call house left, not stage, no, house right, stage left, okay. So they're on the stage looking out from the screen. We say stage left, we mean James Joyce. We say house left, we mean Ezra Pound from the point of view of the audience. And Hugh Kenner in the middle is a great scholar and writer, and he knows tons about James Joyce and Ezra Pound. He wrote a book called The Pound Era. And Pound somewhat helped Joyce along in his career as a famous writer, author of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake and such. So this slide is more STEM, in other words, more science, technology, engineering, mathematics, like that. That's again Applewhite with Fuller, a younger Applewhite. Didn't know him in that year, in that age. I would have been at Princeton by then. And he's with Bucky at the Waldorf Astoria that's an American Express card. Stories behind that picture. And I've brought the Turk back. You may not remember, but the Turk is in the very first slide next to Babbage and Ada, because we're moving forward with computation and computers, and she's the first computer programmer, Ada, like that. Here we have on the left Geoffrey Hinton, who is what we think of as a bringing computers forward into the artificial intelligence era. And above in the middle is H.S.M. Coxeter, aka Donald Coxeter, who's also at the University of Toronto, earlier cohort than Geoffrey Hinton, but he's an extended Euclideanist. He's the polytopes guy. Wrote regular polytopes, really famous, and Fuller dedicated his synergetics to Donald Coxeter. And Applewhite helped Fuller write synergetics. Okay, so some philosophers now. Ludwig Wittgenstein on a house left. Rorty, Richard in the middle, and James Dewey, who Rorty studied a lot. Not me. I haven't read a whole lot of Dewey, actually. Some. Wittgenstein was my guy. I studied him under Rorty. Rorty was my thesis advisor at freshman. In my undergrad, I should say, trajectory through Princeton University, where he was at that time. And Wittgenstein is a hugely influential philosopher that you've probably heard of, or if not, here's the rabbit hole entrance. But I don't go down it right away because I'm trying to keep this not unlimited length. John Dewey in the middle there, and that's Walt Whitman on the far right. And in Achieving Our Country, Rorty left. He's pulling forward through that whole tradition of the Transcendentalists and connecting it to the civil rights movement, anti-imperialism, middle class life without needing dependence on oppressive networks. Is that possible? Can we have a utopia, basically? Can the planet support people at what we would call a middle class lifestyle minimum? Like you have security, you have food, you have access to transportation, goods and services, entertainment. What we would today, I could connect that to the college lifestyle as well, where you maybe have a dorm and cafeteria. You might not have a full kitchen in every cabin or whatever we call it, every living quarters, every pod. We might have lots of arrangements that we would consider healthy and middle class, even Native Americans out in the forest living a rich and healthy lifestyle. It doesn't necessarily mean you have fossil fuel cars or whatever. Anyway, Rorty's wondering if that kind of middle class lifestyle can become sustainable, and he's linking it to what he would consider left, politically left, without necessarily being at the feet of Marx, right? Without necessarily trying to become an ideologue in that respect. Now, you might be, right? So, left without Marxism is often associated with like Ford Foundation, Rockefellers, and stuff. Neoliberalism, even, where you're pushing a kind of social agenda that's anti poverty, but it still might be imperialist, right? So, I'm not saying I'm a neoliberal or anything. I'm just saying we can get geopolitical discussions going around these figures and have our debates. Coxeter in the middle here, we're looking at Alan Turing and Ludwig Wittgenstein, who has Turing as a student there for a while. There's some interesting notebooks where Turing asks questions and so on, and there's some debate or talk between the two. And Coxeter in the middle, this would be symbolizing higher math in some ways. You see, Wittgenstein wanted to explore mathematics using the same techniques he was using to explore natural language. His investigations, as he called them, were cross-disciplinary, and I'm embracing that too. Now, there's Nietzsche, Kaufman, another professor at Princeton and contemporary when I was there. I spent some time with him, including in his office, one-on-one. He liked my writing. He told me that, too. He thought I was the best writer in that cohort. And there's Werner Erhard on the far left, who I have not met, but I did do his S training, which came around 1979-80 for me. I continued because I approved of the message, I guess you could say, and was doing volunteer logistics for the New York, New Jersey area centers after Princeton even. And Bucky Fuller and Erhard became buddies late in Bucky's life. And the Hunger Project, he joined as advisory on that. And I tracked that after Princeton, after Walter Kaufmann, who was a translator of Nietzsche there on the right. not a contemporary at all. Kaufman, being in our time, he had fought against Germany as a German. He had gone over to the Americans because he didn't like what was happening to his people there in terms of their turning into somewhat monstrous, uh, what happened there. So Kaufman was also an interrogator of Germans after the war, and he did DAS training too, and he thought it was he thought it was interesting as I understood it. As I understood him, I went to one of those get to meet your teacher, sit on his living room floor, and he told us all stuff and about his life and how he did this S thing. He thought was pretty interesting, and was available nearby. So that's what I did. There's a shot of my high school's yearbook self in this Princeton context between my two professors. They were not my only two professors. Vic Preller was big. Dr. Diamond. There were so many interesting teachers there of all walks of life. Enjoyed reading Borges a bit, in Spanish, that is. But Borges says he prefers English, I think. Anyway, my Spanish not very good. I corresponded with Applewhite a lot, both email and regular snail mail. There's me writing from Bhutan, where my parents were living, and this whole network of people who knew Bucky Fuller that I got to meet and be part of was a big part of my sort of adulthood, growing from being a high school teacher in Jersey City, bouncing around the East Coast, then moving back to the West Coast by way of visiting my parents in Bangladesh at the time, in Dhaka, and then they came back to Portland with me, and I just said, I'll stay here and not go back to the East Coast where I had been trying to scrape it together. I had interesting work, good chapters I'll talk about sometime. In other slides have talked about, or other YouTubes. Upper left, we have D.W. Jacobs, Peter Meissen, and Trevor Blake. These are people I've gotten to know through. That was a play for Bucky Fuller, about Bucky Fuller, a one-man play in Seattle in this case. A play I later saw again in Portland. That's Kiyoshi Kuramiya under me there, who I worked with to get the BFI.org website off the ground. I was also first webmaster for Kenneth Nelson, the famous tensegrity sculptor guy who did other things besides tensegrity as well. He and I became friends, and Jay Baldwin. I have a video about where he features or shows up to talk about the transparent skin of large domes that are being used as like greenhouses, like at Cornwall at the Eden Project. Pillow domes. That was something Jay Baldwin researched, did hands-on work with. Bucky Works is a book by Jay Baldwin. Spent some hours talking to him. Very interesting dude. And then there's the Fuller Explorer Award in '91, which I got as well. This is David Koski's. It's from my Facebook. This is me posting, however, many years later, pictures of that. That's, again, me in Jersey City with my two philosophy heroes to my right and left, Wittgenstein and Bucky Fuller, who was also into tensegrity. Having overlapped at Black Mountain College with Kenneth Nelson, the two were like, struck the match. One's the matchbook, one's the match. We're not sure which is which, and they had a rivalry after that. And it was my privilege to be friends of both. Although Bucky I didn't know that well. Kenneth, I stayed at his place and stuff. Bucky and I corresponded, though. And I believe we were in touch pretty strongly there. And so there's my dad, and on my right, your right, and that guy's Kenneth Boulding on the other side. The gray scaled picture, the black and white picture, that's Kenneth Boulding. My dad's in the color picture. Not sure where that is. And in the middle, Russ Chu and me, when I was getting married in the Rose Garden. No, it's not the Rose Garden. Rhododendron Garden here near Reed College. Don Wicca was my wife, and Russell Chu here's my best man at that event. Here, David Koski, Trevor Blake, and it looks like a vampire is looking on from behind with Voodoo Donuts, maybe? Not sure. Pink Box, and Glenn Stockton with the hat. All good friends. This is in a coffee shop in a church, a Methodist, kind of a ghost church, because it's not really used as a church much, but they do have this coffee shop, or did. And we visited, so this is in my neighborhood. Here, this is a Cuban restaurant, so, my network now is where I'm delving a bit. And people I've known and become friends with, such as Alex Aris on the left. His dad was a professor of religion at Oxford and like that, who married Aung San Suu Kyi of Burma. And the guy on the right was Aung San Suu Kyi's sixth grade teacher, Methodist school, I think, in Burma many years ago. And he'd always followed her career since then. A very twisted and winding path. And Alex lived in our neighborhood. He's since moved away. We got to be friends. And Bob Fuller, who used to be his mother's teacher, was a really well-known physics teacher in the Midwest. Like, his specialty was the teaching of physics. Carplus was his hero. And I learned a lot from him. Tons of stuff. Very important character for me, and connected to my career as a Python programmer. I did a lot around first-person physics, where you take sensors, maybe put it on a ballerina, and then translate that to stick figure, ballerina dancing, and so on. And yeah, this could go on and on and on. This is just the tip of the iceberg, as always, but I'm just suggesting that you too can tell a story where you locate yourself and then prime the pump for jumping off and going down, following various rabbit holes that would extend from this sort of central matrix, which I threw together for that purpose, right? Down the Wittgenstein rabbit hole, how that connects to synergetics, Wittgenstein's investigations. Like, how can we look at synergetics as language games of a mathematical nature, especially the volumes table that he provides, rooted in a second and third power root picture, kind of like normal Greek math, except triangle and tetrahedron instead of square and cube for second and third powering. So it's a fork in the road. He explores that few have the stamina to go down that rabbit hole because it's so obvious, and how could we have missed it? Better to just cover that up. So we'll talk about that cover up in another slideshow. Talk to you later.